Thank you for the detailed explanation. For our audience, they can also see the reference which will be linked to this video. Why has there been a complete disregard of natural immunity from the health authorities?
Well, you need to ask that to the health authorities.
But what do you believe? Do you believe that natural immunity is as strong as from the vaccine-induced immunity? Should there be more importance given to natural immunity? What is your opinion?
It's a very difficult question, and it requires some background. We know that the immune system, when you're exposed to a virus, there are a number of responses, and I'm going to mention them all. You have everything from the natural, the mucus lining our nasal and respiratory passages, which helps to stop bacteria and viruses from infecting the cells. You have different types of what are called antibodies, which are proteins, which basically are the exact opposite of a part of the virus, which is called an antigen, but defined in that way. So they bind together. So the antibody binds to the virus, and there are different functions for antibodies. For example, immunoglobulin A, which may be present in the intestines or in other parts of the respiratory tract, will bind the virus and not allow it to enter into the cell and eventually be destroyed. The immunoglobulins or the antibodies, which are usually involved with controlling an infection which enters it enters your body and actually breaks through the first defenses and is infecting your cells in your nose or in your respiratory passages or in your lungs, are usually the IgG and IgM type. And to explain, IgM is the first antibody which is produced on the first time you ever encounter a new infection. And is usually produced more rapidly. But then it is not the best antibody. Then after a while, the immune system adapts and produces an even better antibody, usually an IgG, immunoglobulin G, which basically inactivates the virus in various ways, either by binding to it and not allowing it to enter the cell, or helping other cells to destroy it. Like there may be cells which actually then capture the virus and destroy it. Or as if the virus has infected a cell already, these antibodies can actually identify these cells for them to be destroyed by specific cells within the body, like T cells, which actually look for cells that are infected with virus and destroy them to not allow the virus to continue to replicate. So we have all of these different parts of the system. And there's another important part. So the beta cells, you may have heard of beta cells or B cells, produce antibodies. It's an oversimplification, but it's a general term. And the T cells are the cells which are the T killer cells, which go out to kill cells which are need to be killed, like they're infected or maybe they have cancer. And there are also T cells which actually control the antibody production, T helper cells and T suppressor cells. And all of these cells, after you've got the infection, remain in your body and they are prepared for the next exposure to the virus, and that is immunity. So you have like a memory, and there are certain memory cells. So one of the things I didn't like in the local press was there was a report that, you get COVID, but you're only immune for 6 weeks because after 6 weeks your antibody levels decline or decay. Well, thank God that happens, because imagine that every single virus and bacterium you were ever exposed to in your entire life, your body produces antibodies against each and every one to levels high enough to actually fight infection. And they remain there for the rest of your life. Eventually, you will clog up your arteries and veins with all the protein, the antibody protein concentrated in your blood. So the immune system has been developed over, hundreds of millions of years. And it's very efficient. So what happens is that the antibodies, which are no longer required, the levels fall, but the immunity is still there. So the next time you're exposed to the virus, instead of first the IgM is produced and then the IgG, and the optimal immune response happens after 3 or 4 days. When you have the memory cells, you might have an optimal immune response within a few hours. So you are immune. Okay, that's the theory. So in practice, what does this mean? There have been studies on immunity against COVID-19, against SARS-CoV-2. So first of all, people are actually immune to COVID-19, to SARS-CoV-2, without ever having encountered the virus. How is that possible? Because it's a bit difficult to explain, but the body in its evolution produces all the possible antibodies to all the possible antigens. through a complicated process. So you have those antibodies in your body. And people over time, we think by exposure to a number of coronaviruses, probably about 4 different coronaviruses, 2 of which cause the common cold, there's such a similarity with the SARS-CoV-2, with the COVID-19 virus. Basically, such a similarity that you actually have some immunity to COVID-19 without ever having encountered it. And the level of people with this level of immunity, some immunity to COVID-19, we don't know how effective, but we know that there is some immunity, maybe up to 40-60% of the population, which is why when the original pandemic came around, it turned around pretty quickly. Besides that, people who are actually infected produce all of the immunoglobulins, the T cells, the B cells, in different varying degrees. And they have the memory cells. These people who are now immune, studies have been performed. So there have been studies performed. Let's go to the make it even more interesting. SARS, the original severe acute respiratory syndrome virus, SARS, which produced SARS, MERS, and other related infections with similar viruses. People who were infected more than 18 years ago with SARS are immune to SARS today, 18 years later. Studies have been done on this. SARS-CoV-2 is 80% SARS. So it's likely that once you get COVID-19, once you are exposed to the SARS-CoV-2 virus, you will be immune probably for a very long time, more than 18 years, possibly for life. People who have had COVID, who are exposed to the virus, SARS-CoV-2, typically nursing staff and doctors in the NHS in the UK in March, where their immunity was studied towards the end of the year, November, December. And they found that they had levels of immunity, robust levels of immunity, all those months later. And a similar study was performed in the United States. Again, they found high levels of immunity 6-8 months after the COVID-19 infection. So the natural immunity is quite robust. When studies have been on UK and Israel comparing now this is observational evidence, so it's looking at how many people get COVID and whether they were exposed to COVID before or whether they've been vaccinated, these type of studies. They are prone to bias, but they give you a lot of information. They've shown that people who were infected with COVID and people who were vaccinated have more or less the same protection against COVID. So whether you had COVID-19 in the past, with the PCR test positive and symptoms, so that is the best way of diagnosing it, that you have symptoms and a positive PCR, then it's likely to be COVID. So people who have had COVID, so they're immune to COVID, and people who have been vaccinated, and the vaccines do work and they are immune to COVID, both of them had more or less the same chance of getting COVID if exposed. So the natural immunity and the vaccination are more or less comparable. And it's likely that the natural immunity is very long. If it's anything similar to the original SARS immunity, it's probably going to be 18 plus years, likely for life. With the vaccine, we still don't know. We hope it will be long term, but there's a problem. The vaccines vaccinate with the spike protein, so you only have one protein on the virus. You're only protected if the virus doesn't mutate that spike protein, and it's only one type of antibody. The natural immunity will have more antibodies to different points on the virus, and you also have activation of T cells. However, besides the theory, in practice, when you compare, the efficacy of natural immunity and of vaccination is pretty similar. So the vaccines do work, that is quite clear. I hope I've answered your question.
You have answered it very clearly. So you highlighted that natural immunity probably lasts around 18 years. And
we don't know. It's for SARS, but probably more than 18 years.
Probably. And for the vaccine that they also work, the vaccines, why are they promoting already booster shots? One of my questions.
I don't know. I know that the randomized control trials originally on the vaccines were basically showing a 90% efficacy. Now we're talking about Pfizer and Moderna, because AstraZeneca is less effective. And in fact, I'm quite surprised that it's still being used, because once you have a superior product, use a superior product. But that is another argument. The spike protein antibodies will obviously decay. So after you're vaccinated, you will get the spike of the antibodies, and then the levels will decay, as I explained before. This is the natural thing. How long the memory cells against the spike protein last, we don't know, I would say, and I am not an expert in that area. I haven't seen an explanation of why they're going to give boosters. However, what I have seen is one paper, which is a systematic review of all of the papers published on the safety and efficacy of the vaccines, including in humans and primates. I've shared this on my Facebook page. And this shows, through this systematic review, that it's likely, possibly because of decaying antibody levels, that with the vaccines, you will require a number of boosters to reach an antibody level which is considered by scientists to be appropriate. Again, I would take a different approach, but I'm not an expert. I mean, if it's working, if we've seen in Israel, we've seen in the UK, we've seen in other countries, you have a sudden 90% fall in morbidity, in mortality, in getting sick, mortality, in ICU, in intensive care admissions and deaths with the vaccines. You have a 90% reduction. If that reduction is robust, if it's sustained over time, why keep revaccinating? Let's not forget that these vaccines have not been approved by any authority anywhere in the world. So they work, there's no doubt. They have severe adverse effects, there's no doubt. But they have not been approved by any international regulatory authority. They've been given emergency authorization, which means they can be used in an emergency, and one has to discuss whether at the current situation, with a few cases a day, whether it's an emergency, because I would not agree with that. But they are being used, they're being promoted even in people at very low risk or at practically zero risk, including children, without any authorization. And now we're talking about boosters with a drug, with a vehicle, with a pharmaceutical agent, which has yet not gone through all the safety checks, whatever people say. It takes years for a drug to be fully tested, all the information to be available, and then to be approved. I fully support the use of these vaccines in people at high risk. Absolutely, if somebody has a high risk of dying of COVID, definitely you should be vaccinating them. If they don't, you need to have a more informed decision based on risk and harm. And it usually takes, I think the average, when a drug receives emergency medical authorization, and then it is then moved on to the full authorization, that phase, even if accelerated, even if there is actually a reason to accelerate the process, the median time for that is 26 months, so that's over 2 years. But these companies are now pushing for these medicines to be fully authorized in less than 12 months after their production. These vaccines which have not been fully authorized are now being recommended for universal vaccination, and if people don't take the vaccines, they actually are penalized in some form or way. This is not usual, and one needs to carefully look at, yes, there are the benefits, but whether these are some kind of a panacea, whether these are some kind of medicines which are now required for everyone to take, because otherwise, people are not going to be immune. Natural immunity is very robust, long-lasting. The vaccine immunity, we still don't know enough about, and so I think this argument still requires further research.
Thank you very much.